welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today I'm joined by Adam Robinson. Adam graduated from Rice University in 2003 and then spent the first 8 years of his career as a credit trader for Lehman Brothers and Barclays Capital before bootstrapping his first company, Robly, to an 8-figure exit in 2021. However, Adam had no downtime because in 2020, he already started building his next company, Retention.com, which he grew to 20 million ARR in 3.5 years without raising any capital. Adam still serves as the CEO of Retention.com to this day, but he didn't stop there. In 2023, he started another company, RB2B, which has also taken the market by storm. I've been following Adam on LinkedIn for a long time, but just recently noticed that he not only bootstrapped his companies, but he's darn proud of it. So I'm particularly excited to get his thoughts on all that's changing in B2B sales and learn his secrets to bootstrapping world-class SaaS companies to hypergrowth. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave us a comment if you have questions or feedback. If you're joining us from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please drop us a review and let us know what you think of the episode. This is much appreciated. Without further ado, let's dive in and get his thoughts. Adam, thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Collin. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise, as I just said, it's been a while that I've been following you, and I don't know if you've been always posting about the bootstrapping topic, but it's been popping up in my feed, and it certainly got my attention. So what I want to do here, I want to dive into that. Before we do, I want to cover a few questions here that I've been asking most people, but we can maybe take a slightly different angle to some of them. Perhaps instead of just giving me your thoughts, you may also want to share kind of how you've navigated these at your companies. I assume, by the way, just as a baseline here, did you have salespeople, marketers, or is everything you've done self-serve? I think you've had sales teams, right?
So of we have a salesperson on RB2B right now. We have an entirely sales-led motion for Retention.com. It's not PLG at all. And then my first business, Robly, was also sales-led. So
got it. Okay, cool. So is it safe to say RB2B is a little bit more on the self-serve side? Like, is it because of the nature of the product, or are you kind of easing in towards a more sort of efficient model?
Well, my original view was that freemium was a good model for that product because no matter how small you are, there is value to seeing a website visitor. And then, the only question is like, what's that worth? And if the answer, what's that? And the answer is the cost is zero, and it like takes 60 seconds to set up, and like, why wouldn't everybody use it? So there are some issues with it, which, we either can or can't discuss, but that was the original thought. I have a belief that outreach is getting harder, and I'm pretty sure almost everyone who's listening to this would probably agree with that. And when we were thinking about the go-to-market motion, it's like, well, what's a future-proofed go-to-market, right? Like, it's certainly not cold email. Like, I mean, that's like the technical aspects of actually getting a cold email to hit someone's inbox today versus even a year ago. It's like a monumental shift, and that will just keep. This cat and mouse game will continue, and it's going to keep getting harder. And the amount of volume you need to send out to get one response will just keep getting multiplied by, we'll just keep putting another zero on it. So, it kind of reduces the effectiveness for anyone who has a reasonably small TAM in numbers. Like, you just have to do something else. It's not an email game anymore. And so it's like, in a world where response rates are zero, what's a go-to-market motion? In my opinion, the value of the influencer thought leader profile on LinkedIn if you're selling to B2B, but like other places if you're doing it, like if your audience is elsewhere, it's like it is undeniably increasing with the trends in the world. Like, as sure as I am that it's going to be harder to cold email in 2026, like, there will be other people like me getting startups off the ground through influencer profiles in 2026 more, right? So then it's like, okay, what happens with sales if the whole thing that outreach, for example, enabled, which was like, or really it started with Aaron Ross, predictable revenue. It's like, you can put a college kid in front of a keyboard, have them press buttons and click mice, and like positive response will come back, right? That enabled this whole, it was like before that, it was field sales. At least my understanding. I was in college at the time. But like, IBM had like the blue, whatever they called it, the people in blue suits out there selling. And then there were still some freemium examples and PLG and stuff, but like this whole middle of tech sales, like big ACVs, and you could like source the demos in a way where the math worked. I think it's just like a tube of toothpaste that got squeezed in that middle of like a college kid hitting keys. Like, I just can't imagine that continuing to work. Obviously, if you can take a prospect to a Taylor Swift concert or whatever, like you're going to be able to get them on a demo. That will always work. It always has worked. It's just in real life, networking is never going away. That's sales. And then the freemium thing, as we become more connected, if you can create a great product and there's this beautifully serendipitous combination of like being able to create content for a target audience that they choose to consume irrespective of what you're selling them, right? Like, think about that. There could be no better way to build trust than people tuning into you for your thought leadership, independent of what you're selling, right? Yeah. So the combination of that plus a very differentiated free offer, in my opinion, was like, that's like the future-proof go-to-market. Now, if you ask me 10 months later whether I think for RB2B in particular, given some of the product challenges that I see it having, whether it's the best way to do it, jury's still out. But I'm highly convicted that the combination of those two things, we will see more and more businesses really taking off that have those qualities. But it's kind of like all of it. It's like the thing I was interested in was I had like cracked virality of LinkedIn content. And then I thought that I had come up with a very viral, because we didn't have competition at the time. It was only like, company level ID. And like we showed up with something that wasn't only at the person level, it was also free. So like, bam. And like the virality of the offer was like kind of like the virality of the content. They were working off of each other. Great marketing needs a great product, and probably vice versa.
Yeah, that's what just went in my head as you said
probably
that. Yeah.
Vice versa, but like a truly great product will just spread word of mouth. You know what I mean? So like the marketing accelerates it, but like a truly great, and if you can have moats and be differentiated or like whatever, like I think, great marketing can make it colossal, but like great marketing in a weak product is not a great combo. You'd rather have a great product than weak marketing.
It can be great for a year until the churn comes in, right? That's usually what happens there. Yeah, it's very easy to fall for the, pig with lipstick in SaaS. They raise some venture capital. The website looks amazing. They hire Wolf Allens to do their branding. And then you start using the thing. You're like, wait a minute. The product looks nothing like the website, right? It almost looks like it was designed by a completely different person.
Yeah, I thought you were going to tell me everybody who was about to buy my software.
Yeah.
And you haven't told me a single person. Totally, man. Totally.
Well, it sounds like we sort of answered the first question here. I wanted to get just a little baseline there on whether, you're managing sales teams, leading teams for this, or doing most of, sort of self-serve. But the first question was what's broken with B2B Outbound and how did we get here? It sounds like you kind of explained it. And what went through my head, as you're saying that, is that really what sounds like you're describing is like, we're too often still going to the places that people are not spending their time anymore, which is their email inbox or trying to hit them on the cold call when, their phone's on silent all day. And it's like people are spending their time on social media, right? That's where they choose to go. So if we can be there, that's a win, right? If we can get the right message, get the right content, to your point, put stuff there that they would want to follow either way. Then you don't have to fight this uphill battle of like, why don't they answer the phone? Why don't they open their inbox? They're already choosing to go on social media. So just get your message there. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Well, I think there's some other fundamental issues. I think a lot of AEs work in email in their inbox, but like the problem is as spam filters have increasing. So like when there was not a lot of volume, predictable revenue days, pursuing that strategy of outbound BDRs, no big deal. Everybody's happy. As the volume increased by 10,000 times, spam filters at the same time clamped down, which then the only response that SDR managers have to that is increasing activity.
Yeah.
And now you have the AI spam cannon showing up. And like, it's like, oh, you thought increasing volume by 100,000 times was a lot. Here's increasing volume by 100 million times, right? So like,
Yeah.
how positive are you that at least twice as many cold emails will be sent in 2026 and 2025? I would be willing to bet my entire net worth that at least twice as many cold emails will be sent.
Yeah.
Why? Because the only way to respond to falling reply rates is to up the volume.
Yeah. I mean, they're using burner domains now. Like that's becoming common,
exactly. So like that, I think more so, like, I think you're right. People are spending all of their time on social media and ever more so, but like salespeople, you know, like people still, and granted, like we don't all sell to salespeople, but like a lot of people are in their inbox many times per day, but the inbox is just fucked. I think Gmail has done a good job at like actually their folder system, and it works pretty well.
The spam filter is great on Gmail. I find that
it's like amazing,
accurate.
but like, you know, like, yeah, like anyway, it's automation across any channel that will allow it. And like LinkedIn tries to not allow automated DMs, but like they do, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, automation across every channel that will allow it is what's making it harder.
Yeah,
like,
it's hard to detect too on LinkedIn. I think they've been experimenting with just trying to detect different things, because I've gotten really good on LinkedIn, you know, of just like responding to comments like rapid fire. And I've had it triggered that it thinks I'm AI. And it's like just because I'm moving so fast. So like, yeah,
dude, I need your gift.
It's tough, man.
I'm like I try to like leave thoughtful stuff, and like what's annoying about trying to leave thoughtful stuff is like at least 2/3 of people are using an AI now, and you can tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? So
Yeah.
like
I can definitely tell the ones that are very obvious, because there's like 3 people that they comment on my post like the moment it goes out.
Yeah.
And I know it's AI because the comments are ridiculous, and like these people aren't even like in sales. It's like
they like ask you a question at the end. They're like, so how do you think this will, it's like, fuck you, man. Like, what do you mean, how do I? Come on.
I mean, I'll
like,
take the engagement. I hope that
to...
it helps the AI, the algorithm, but yeah, I tend to not respond to those.
Yeah, it's just a little annoying. My whole thing is like, it really is an amazing place to actually create human-to-human connection at scale. If you're just using an AI bot to spam comments all over the place, that is not actually happening. Like, that person is not deepening their relationship with you through this exchange.
Yeah. It's a complete waste of time.
Like, yeah. I hope eventually like LinkedIn can either stop that, or like they can like filter up the real comments or something like that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it feels like where we're headed with social media. I'm going a little off topic here and I want to keep us on track, but it feels like where we're headed with that is there's going to be some sort of digital ID, right? They're sort of easing us into that with the verification badges and stuff. I think we're probably headed toward a place where you can't really even have an online profile unless there's a real person tied behind it. But that doesn't stop them from using AI still, right? So that'll just get rid of fake accounts and stuff. Yeah. So it doesn't really solve that problem. Okay, I want to get your thoughts here, and this is going to tie into what we'll talk about, later with your companies. But I want to just get your high level thoughts on the growth at all cost model. You know, I define this as the standard VC playbook of like, let's just keep raising the valuation, let's keep hiring more people, and let's kind of put profitability, kind of on the back burner, and we'll worry about that later, if ever. It seems that, pretty clear, especially based on your post yesterday and the event you're hosting later today. I know where you stand on that. Have you always, I guess it's also safe to say you've always felt this way because you got your first business off the ground, Bootstrap, but maybe tie that back a little bit to, you were working in finance originally. Did you shape sort of those beliefs early on, sort of there? Like, where did that come from?
I just always liked making money, and it never made sense to me to lose money.
Yes.
And like, my friends were like very, I had friends in finance, but I also had like a group of friends in tech in New York, and they were like friends with like the first employees at Facebook. And I just like couldn't get my head around what they were doing. I was like, man, they're like storing 3 different file sizes to just burn my, and then like, look, like,
that was the big one, right? Facebook
clearly,
was like,
clearly I didn't get that, right? Like, but like number one, I always like the idea of making money. Number two, when I left finance, it was like a very different time than this. It was like 2011, and like remote work was not a thing. Like the idea, it's like I put on a tie every morning, and I got in a cab at like, I woke up at 4:45, ran across the Brooklyn Bridge 365 days a year, and then got in a cab and got on the desk at 6 a.m. and like worked until 5:30, and like went to drinks and then dinner, and then like went home and did it all again, and like took 3 and 4 day vacations for 10 years, right? So when you say like you could have a small software company where you're like making $1 million a year and living in Aspen in a condo by the gondola. Like that is so, you know what I mean? If like the only thing that is possible is what I just described, which like, by the way, it was great, made a ton of money. It enabled this entire life that I have now. It is so unfathomable that would even be a possibility with like the world that I came from and what was happening in the world at the time.
Yeah.
Now it's very possible. There's tons of we're an entirely remote company. You know what I mean? Like I'm tied to Austin because of my family, but if I wasn't, like my wife and I'd be traveling all over the place. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just what we love to do. So like I left finance, and then I was drawn to books like Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, 37 Signals, Rework, and Remote. Kind of like these group of people that were extolling the values of bootstrapping and the freedom of having a lifestyle business. And I was totally sold on it. And like, I somehow managed to get that. Like my first company was like, it got stuck at 3 million ARR, but like we ended up having only 6 people. So like me and my co-founders, we were doing okay. It was like, okay, but like not enough to have like a family in New York City or whatever by any stretch of the imagination. But still I was a single guy, I could do whatever I wanted. And I was doing whatever I wanted. Like there was a period where I ditched my life in New York and I was just gallivanting around the world, working a few hours a week, like before I started my last company. And it was like very awesome in many ways. And it's like kind of like not enough in many ways, to not be fully engaged with something in your life, in my opinion. I think that's what I need now. Like I need to be like all in on something. I'm like at my best when I'm like really excited about what I'm doing, and it's like all encompassing and it's challenging. And then I like go home to these toddlers and that's challenging. And like the weekends are challenging because of them and like the work, you know what I mean? And it's like just a huge amount of responsibility is like kind of what's good for my well-being most of the time. But like that was how I came into this. And then, I'll give you a couple examples of, so 2 things happened in the last 2 weeks that were in that email marketing space that I was in. 2 companies that were shining stars. One of them was called Infusionsoft. They changed their name to Keep. They raised $100 million, and they sold last week for $80 million. So what does that mean? The investors that put the $100 million in, they got that entire $80 million, and management got nothing because investors invest preferred, right? So the investors even lost money, and everybody else was a donut, right? So like that company's been around for 23 years. Could you imagine that? Like so like it's even worse than failing to exist for 23 years and sell for less than the preferred that you took trying to hit a home run.
It's almost inevitable, right? Just the way markets flow.
It just hurts my heart. No, like either you have to maintain your your comet-like trajectory, right? And grow into that valuation, or you turn into a zombie, which like there's a whole group of go-to-market companies that raised at huge valuations in 2021, 2023 that are in the same spot. Like, we're going to see Gong and 6 Sense and, Outreach and all these guys, like they're going to sell for less money than the amount that they took on, because you can't raise at 50 times revenue and not grow, which is what's happening to all of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like
unless they wait 20 years for the market to rebloat, but I don't even think that you can do that once you take that step back, right? Like, because you're going to just lose so much in the survival game of trying to sort of weather the storm.
Well, look, here's my contention. Whether the markets turn or not, the reason that they were able to raise where they were is because they were showing astronomical growth, which is much easier to create when you're earlier in your product life cycle at lower revenue numbers.
Less
right?
competition. It's new.
Somebody's going to pay 50 times revenue if you grow your revenue from 100 to 200 million. But they're assuming it's going to go from 200 to 400 the next year.
Yeah.
The second that doesn't happen, that company is never worth 50 times revenue again. So they're in zombie state.
Yeah.
Right? Because they can't. And then eventually, which takes decades, after cycling through management 10 different times and trying to like build everything under the sun to like tech consolidation play or whatever else, they throw their hands up and they sell for less than the money that was put in. Right? And like, unfortunately, and by the way, there was another one in the email space where this happened too last week too. It was called Acton. It's a marketing automation platform for B2B. So they raised 53 million of venture capital. They sold for 53 million to a SPAC. 20% of it was cash. The rest was stock. 20 years old, right? So like, that's just two that happen. You know what I mean? Like for every two that you see, there's 1,000 that are stuck in this weird place, right? So,
and then plenty that just can't even stay stuck. They're going out of business.
But I argue that's almost better because at least you can fucking get on your way.
And let people move on. Yeah.
Because like nothing happened there. It's like, that was just so let me just contrast that to another company in the email space that started maybe 5 years later. And this is my, so like I talk about the Roger Bannister moment. Like it's the guy who ran the first 4-minute mile. And then the next year, 24 people ran under a 4-minute mile just because they realized that it was possible.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So quotas are the same.
Yeah. So like my Roger Bannister moment was like, I was listening. I was chasing down everything about the email space I could possibly learn. And then there was this guy, Ross Paquette, who has a company called Maripost. He was selling enterprise. I was selling a $68 subscription. I'm like, what does this guy know that I don't know? So I went and learned everything about him. So his company, he got to 30 million ARR pretty quickly, but ran it super lean. And he was a sole founder, bootstrapped, spitting out $20 million of cash every year to himself for like 6 years while he was figuring out what the next thing was for him. And the next thing was for him was doing like a kind of like debt acquisition. He was buying EBITDA businesses with debt and like doing a private equity style roll up. Right. So he's got more EBITDA now than he did then. But like, I was like, what? Like, I've never heard of anything like that. Like this guy, like he like had a private jet with his signature on it when he was
a money printer at that point.
When he was in his 20s, right? And like to me, I had been getting good traction with retention.com. I was like, I could see it being the churn dynamic was not great, but I was like, we can get this to 25 very lean. I'm not sure if we can get it to 100, but I know we can get it to 25 with all that's happening here. And like, it's not just about the founders getting rich. It's like the amount of flexibility that you have when you have that kind of cushion and like the independence you have and like the freedom you have to pursue whatever opportunities that you have. I mean, to me, that's amazing. So by the way, circling back to Infusionsoft and Acton, like this guy entered the market taking customers from Infusionsoft. So like, and he just like ran his company in a totally different way. Meanwhile, he could turn around and sell that business for many $100 million in 1 second because like a financial buyer will come in, right? So like it's like, okay, maybe you miss the billionaire outcome, but like in all other ways of measuring, besides I get to say that I'm a unicorn, which by the way, I think that he can, with like 30 or 40 million EBITDA, I think he's probably safely above $1 billion valuation, but like, it just seems infinitely more appealing. Look, also my journey as an entrepreneur and everybody I've ever spoken to is like, I find a way to break out and then I get stuck. And then I find a way to break out again and then I get stuck again. And it's not just it's like we have a whole team getting stuck and unstuck again now, right? But like I'm getting interviewed, so I say hi. When you add external capital and burn to that situation, it literally can become catastrophic very quickly, right? Like, I've been stuck for 3 years before. If you're telling me I got 18 months to figure this out, like there's no way. There's just not like RB2B, like it's growing 7-10% a month right now. Like, I don't like what we're selling. You know what I mean? Like it is not like, I would be very uncomfortable if I were burning money. Like I turned everything off, like all of our cold email, all of our marketing, like I cut $100,000 per month of marketing spend out of RB2B because I don't like how it looks right now. Like, I think there's a totally different way to use the product. I think we've been educating people the wrong way. I think the UGC motion that we had is wrong. Like, it's not to be run through Clay and then sped out through instantly or whatever. So like, but this is just, I'm not stressed out by it because our business is printing $1 million a month, you know, the combination of the companies, and B, I've just been here 10 fucking times. You know what I mean? And like, I just know that my team and I can figure this out. And it's just all about listening to your customers, giving them what they want, and then making more money than you spend. I mean, that super long-winded answer to come back to your original question. Like,
no, it's good.
The two fundamental principles of business, in my opinion, which like for some reason don't apply to tech in any way. Like somehow this is like a way contrarian view, is like, give users what they love, which like I think people mostly agree with, but like the problem is with VC, you got to give investors what they love first because you're actually selling to them because they're actually the people that are paying your payroll, right? So there's this weird push-pull between like, okay, what's the narrative I have to tell them? And then like, how do I also give the customers what they want?
There's often like two different spreadsheets, two different PowerPoints.
But like it's basically a close enough within the Venn diagram. There's some overlap, right? So like that's the game they have to play, right? So like, but it's like the two basic principles are give your customers what they love and make more money than you spend. Like, you know,
you hit the nail on the head, man. That's what I'm thinking about there is like, you're saying, you know, you see things not working, you want to take a pause, slow down the spend. Like what's going through my head there is if we wanted to try to do something like that at a VC backed company, you really wouldn't be able to. There'd be so much pushback on pumping the brakes on anything. They'd want you to spend more money, right?
No way. That's what I'm saying. It's like in like, you know, I'm in this position of immense fortune of, so like, if you're listening to this and you came through my funnel, of course, you know this, but like by virtue of just telling the story of building my companies, it is now marketing the product that I'm selling to my target audience. Right. So that's a really amazing thing. That's a positive feedback loop and the audience is growing and all of this stuff. But now I wake up, I'm like, oh, I have like 114,000 followers on LinkedIn that are all revenue people and mostly, you know, it's 50% early stage founders or whatever. So it's like, what do I want to use the megaphone to do? Like, I want to tell Ross's story, right? Like, I only heard it a couple times when I was sort of coming up. Like, I heard this company in the email space called Campaign Monitor was like running their business like that, like 60 top line, 40 bottom line. And these guys, you know, just something crazy, right? I had heard that Qualtrics got to 30 million ARR with like 4 people working out of the dude's parents' basement, right? Like,
I love that.
And like, why the fuck not? You know what I mean? Like that's what's so shocking to me. It's like, it seems so much harder to raise at 50 times revenue, no matter how much secondary you take, right? Like, of course, these Clay guys, I don't know, they're not going to be able to say it, but like,
they won't tell you.
They stuffed some like money in the bank or whatever, and I'm sure it's fine. But like, how do you know? It's like in Clay's, but like the reason they're able to do it, Clay's in a very unique position. But then again, it's like not that defensible. It's like,
how long will it last?
Brand.
It's not proprietary, right?
So like, to me, it's just like, I love Clay because it's such it's like Clay. It's like there was this great post by Max Altucher after it is like kind of like Zoom Info, 3 billion in 1 billion in revenue, 3 million, 3 billion in valuation. Apollo, he screwed Apollo up, but I think he did it on purpose to like he's like Apollo, 120 million in revenue, 2.6 B, but it's actually 1.6 B. And then Clay, 1.25 B at 30 in revenue. But it's like, I think Clay is the reason that Zoom Info's, one of the reasons that Zoom Info's multiple is not that high. Like they are commoditizing the entire world of data, right? It's like, what pricing power do you have if people no longer need to go to you to build a list and they can just go right into Clay, and though it may be a little bit more expensive, it's not a contract. And like, every data provider's right there, and they can, you know what I mean? Waterfall against each other. Like, and then there's this other thing where like Clay's trying to like what is business software? It's like Satya says this. It's like workflows built on top of a database. Like, okay, if Clay's now your data provider and the database is right there, and you're just sort of working on top of it, then you can build every other software.
Right.
So, you know, and just pay them Clay credits and they're happy. you know?
Yeah.
So it's wild. It's like wild what they're doing. It's like, you know, is AI going to crush SaaS? Like, I don't know, but Clay might, or something like Clay, right? The Clay and the other, but then there's this other thing where it's like, I saw this great Lumascape one day of like Craigslist. And then literally it was like 400 different startups that took a part of Craigslist and just specialized. But like Craigslist is still thriving, you know?
And I would argue part of the reason they're thriving is that they just never went the big money route. So it's free to use. It's just like, they can't be undercut on price, basically.
Right? Totally.
Yeah.
But like, is there this scenario where Clay is the super broad one, and then there's all of these like vertical specific use cases that are like kind of making it easier for the everyman to use Clay?
Sort of like what's happening with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Anyway,
what went through my head there, I was just wanted to throw this in because I don't know if you know, this first company I worked at was Single Platform, got acquired by Constant Contact.
Love Single Platform. Yeah.
You know these?
Dude,
you know
like,
them? Yeah.
I am. Wiley Sorelli is one of the most interesting cats.
I was going to say, you must know him. If you ran across the Brooklyn Bridge every morning, circa 2011, 2012, he was doing the same thing. That's when I was working for him, and he was running probably around the same time every morning. But yeah, I
never met him in person. I have studied him to no end. The go in as a buyer principle. Like when I figured out what Single Platform was doing to sell, I couldn't even believe it.
Yeah, I didn't believe it until I made it work on the phone. Like all through training, I'm like, "There's no way this is crazy." Exactly. But we get out there on the phones, and within the first week, like we're closing a sale, and we're like, "Holy shit!" Like, and it created this cult-like mentality where we all believed in the script so much because it just worked.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking back to that because they sold the company to Constant Contact for $100 million. It was like 60 million cash, and then
18 months in.
Yeah.
1 million ARR.
less than technically. It wasn't even at 1 million yet, if I remember correctly. Yeah. But what's wild about that, I'll throw in a little details here, is that was probably it was definitely wildly overvalued, right? And a large part of that was, timing and all this sort of stuff. And I don't know if you know the whole story, but the way that they even found out about Single Platform was the guy who worked in finance at Constant Contact was riding a train and he saw a magazine opened up with Wiley, an interview of Wiley, and he read about it. And by the time he got off that train, he wanted to buy his company and he went in to make it happen. And so anyway, they rushed to buy it. They wanted to basically acquire the outbound sales team. They were like, Constant Contact's great at sort of inbound marketing and converting, to paid trials to paid. But they wanted to have this big outbound sales engine. And so that's really what they bought Single Platform for. They could have built what we were doing, but there were partnerships and some stuff. But what's interesting about it is that, as great of a company as it was and still is today, they're still around. It was wildly overvalued. And I want to say it was maybe a year after the acquisition happened, Gail Goodman, CEO of Constant Contact, came in and was presenting to us. And I got to meet with her after. A few of us got to go out to lunch with her on the management team. And someone had asked, like, why did you buy Single Platform? And her answer, originally was like this long, all the reasons she bought us. But then it was like a year later, someone asked her again, and her answer was very different. She goes, Wiley's the best salesperson I've ever met in my entire life.
Ever. Yeah.
Ever. That was the reason. And what's interesting about it is they ended up getting acquired again to TripAdvisor for less than it was originally sold for. So it just kind of ties into everything we're talking about here, which is that these numbers, they often don't make a bunch of sense. And you buy a company for all this money because he wasn't going to sell it for less. He would have just said, no, we're crushing it.
He was, I think the deal was he was raising, he was
Series
doing
A.
like a 5 million,
or he was going on to Series B.
Yeah, and he's like, okay, so I'm getting this valuation anyway. If you want the company, pay the fucking valuation.
Yeah.
And
he got to keep running the business for a while, and it was good. I mean, perfect timing for me. Although one could argue perfect timing would have been I came in before the acquisition. I was the month after. But it was, for me to start entry-level sales the month after that acquisition, all the money hits the bank. We're going to grow like crazy. It just created opportunity for me to move up like really fast that I wouldn't have found anywhere else. So that was awesome. But yeah, cool that you know them. I want to get your thoughts on a couple more things here. And, normally what I ask here is like, what do you think's the reason for low sales quota attainment throughout the industry? It's like averages below 40%. But if you want to tie in a little bit of sort of how you've handled that, at retention or even at Robley, wherever you want to go on that topic, I'm curious to get your thoughts.
I just think low quota attainment is, and I hate to say this, but like, I just think it's unrealistic expectations from management. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, it's just happening again this year. It's like you got these managers who like, maybe they're unicorns or maybe they haven't actually been sellers for the past 3 years, and they just don't respect the fact that like we're in a very different world than we used to be, and that like they it's very easy to put numbers in a spreadsheet that like
Yes.
make the picture like look how you want it to look, and then back into how it's really not that hard to get there. But the reality is, I don't know, man. I think the environment is just very different now than it was when a lot of managers were sellers. How could 40% what's quota attainment supposed to be? 80,
I mean, I think it should be 100, but
right.
people
So
argue that. They're like, no, it should be 80. Like, what? No, it should be 100.
So we agree that it shouldn't be 40.
Yeah.
How could it be anything in aggregate? How could it be anything other than people being delusional about what quota should be? Right? Like,
because they can't all be bad salespeople. The whole
right,
industry,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. It's like people didn't all of a sudden get worse at selling over the last 2 years.
Right.
All at the same time.
And it's so like what we end up doing is like we're trading salespeople around like maniacs, spending so much money to hire, fire, rehire, fire. And it's like you just see the AEs bounce around from one startup to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's like they can't be terrible salespeople, or they just wouldn't keep landing jobs. And the same has happened with me as a leader. Like if I lose my job, I can't tell you, like 6 months, 12 months later, the investors from that company are calling me to advise or work with another company. It's like, I'm a little confused here. Like you guys thought I wasn't ready for the next stage of growth or whatever, but like you have 3 other companies that you want me to like none of this makes any sense. And it just, I think, ties back to like a lot of just narrative building, right? They got to pitch the board. They got to have cool story to tell.
Totally.
And, new
they got to
characters
get they got to get their next round.
Yeah.
They got to, you know.
Yeah.
And I think some people hit quota, but probably they have the best organic. Like they have the best. It's like they think they're outbound, but it's really just like
it's the
outbound
product.
people. It's outbound people scooping up organic word of mouth interest.
Yes.
So I look, I'm not a sales manager. I don't know how I'd handle it if my CEO were like, we got, this isn't enough. Right? Like,
well, let me ask you this. Maybe this is a better way to ask the question. Since you did not have the VC pressure on you, how did you think about setting quotas? Did you look at last year's performance and like base it in reality? Or were you like T2, D3, we just need to, back into these ridiculous unicorn numbers?
So my co-founder's doing this right now, and it's specific to like, we have like, in the sales-led motion, it's like 90% other stuff and 10% what you would categorize as pure outbound. Like others, it's like, we have like a really, really talented kind of like event partnership, kind of motion. Like it's really a superpower for us. And that is ultimately like building in real world network, which funnels down to sales demos and closes. But it's not outbound like you think about outbound. And like, we had this conversation on our executive call yesterday, and my co-founder's like, look, like, we need 20K MRR per month per rep of outbound. And like the head of sales is like, okay, Diana, I hear you, but like no one has ever done that. And it's like, it's like this whole thing is like, well, how can you have a head of sales? It's like, no one's ever done that. Like, what do you need? And it's like, what do you mean? What do you need? Like, I'm sitting here like 50% of my content last year was about how outbound's fucked, right? Like, it's like whatever you think. And look, I love this. Like this, Diana's. We are absolutely on the same page on everything. What my view is, the reason no one's ever hit that is because what was outbound when Diana was a seller is not activity that results in deals in 2025. with a high efficacy, right? Like, or if it does, it's something along the lines of they're doing the same thing. It might have used to have been 50% and now it's down to 10.
Yeah.
Right. So like you said, like we're bootstrapped. There's no reason for her to think this other than like, we want to grow the business, right? Like, but like in order to grow it, like we need 150K of pipeline a week or whatever. And how's that going to happen? Right. Well, we got this number of reps and like whatever it's going to, okay, 20K. Right. So like, I think that backing into numbers like that is like, okay, well, so last year you did this. If you just did this, then this year it will be this. It's just hard.
They want it to be so predictable. And maybe, I imagine a lot of this came from, I mean, obviously like predictable revenue and stuff. It probably just was more predictable because I think it took longer for competition to get out there. It took longer to get undercut on price. And so like, in the earlier days of SaaS, like this stuff, it probably was like a bit of a golden, era where you could just kind of follow that playbook. But nowadays you get 6 months into like having something that people actually want to buy. Your next competitor's out there. They're making it and they're trying to figure out how to make it for less than you can.
Believe me. Yeah, you're preaching to the choir there. Zero competitors in March. By like September, 10 other people were selling this along with other stuff.
Because it's easier to copy. At a certain point, like they can be more efficient by learning from all of your mistakes. We just saw it happen with ChatGPT and what's the thing, the Chinese DeepSeek or something. Yeah. And now what will happen is the US will reverse engineer what they did and then they'll leapfrog them. And like that's sort of how this works. And so I think that ties back to like
the speed at which it's happening is like
it's crazy.
Now.
It's crazy. Yeah.
And we're back to this conversation about bootstrapping versus VC. It's like, if you ask me if I want to be burning a lot of dough in that environment, my answer is unquestionably fuck no.
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
the risk to your life of getting on that which like the risk to the investors, like whatever. The VC world, it's like, I'm going to bet on 10 people. If one or two crush,
right.
If one or two turn into like clay or whatever, like, I'm great. If I got another 6 zombies and then 3 you don't work out, like that's perfect for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like
they're straight up gambling. I mean, that's really
and
what
it's a portfolio. It's like a portfolio game, whereas like as the entrepreneur, it's not a portfolio game. It's
Bingo.
Your entire well-being, right?
And you're literally signing up to be a group where you know that like 80 to 90% of them are not going to make it. Yeah, and at a certain point, the investors don't even look at you anymore because they just know you're part of that group.
Yeah.
That's a shitty place to be. I'm with you, man. I couldn't imagine really enjoying that lifestyle, the pressure that comes with it. And to what you said earlier, it's like once you take that money, you report to your board. You don't report to your employees. You don't report to your customers. Like, dude, it's the board first and foremost. So like
I made a post last week that was a huge banger. That was like, one of my buddies shut down his startup after 12 years. He'd raised $30 million. He and his founder family had put $2 million into it themselves. And he tried to hire me in 2017. And then when I said no, because I have my own fucking startup, he told me I wasn't ambitious enough and that they were going to be worth $1 billion. And like, I have the email exchange, right? Like, and then he shut, I was an investor in 2012 or whatever. And, he sent me the dissolution papers, like the same month that I'm like, hitting these like huge life goals that I've had forever. Right.
Yeah.
So
what a dick, by the way.
I mean, whatever. He's a buddy.
I mean, maybe it's just your buddy. You're just busting chops.
If you think I'm not getting enough out of my life, I respect you for pressing me on it. But
if he's trying to push his friend, sure.
Yeah, I respectfully disagreed. I didn't know what the answer was then, but like, I had an idea and sort of ended up there, right? So thanks to Ross, by the way. Like he was.
When I read that, I was like, you should be thanking him because he pushed you, and some level of that was
totally. But like Alina from Chili Piper writes in a comment, she's like, by the way, working for VCs isn't that bad. At least mine aren't. I'm like, Alina, if you're asking me whether I want to work for someone who's not that bad or work for no one at all, there's absolutely no question what option I'm going to take. Like, the reason that you got into this is to work for no one. And now somehow it's reframed as working for these guys is not that bad. Like,
and she has to say that. And I like her, by the way.
Like, this thing, I just don't even understand. Like, okay, they took a lot of secondary. I love that for them, but still, and I'm glad that they did because I don't know what the future is or whatever. They did with these mega high valuations, but like, I don't know, man. It just seems to me like running a okay. So I'm listening to this podcast called Founders by David Senra. I find it to be the most addicting show that I've ever listened to in my life. This guy, David Senra, has read, I think he's up to like 380 biographies of the most successful people in the world, business and otherwise, right? So it'll be like a bunch of business guys, and it'll be like Michael Jordan or Jimmy Buffett or like Bob Dylan or whatever. So interesting thing number one is there's this, and this shouldn't be interesting, but it is. They're kind of all the same people. It's a maniacal dedication to excellence over decades. That's it. It's like I focused on one fucking thing.
Yeah.
I tried to be the best in the world at it. And I just kept banging my head against the wall for 50 years, right? Like all of them, right?
It's an obsessive attitude, right?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. But like, by the way, like that's what it takes. And like, if you're not trying to be the best, you're not even going to be good. And that's what it takes to be the best. And it's like, so like he does 3 episodes on Paul Graham's essays. Somebody asked Paul Graham in 2019, Paul Graham is the founder of Y Combinator and has had his hand in Airbnb, Dropbox, like fucking, like all of the biggest, Stripe, like he sold a company for $60 million and then created Y Combinator because it's what he wanted when he started his company. Basically like, show me the basics, hook me up with funding. Somebody asked him in 2019 on Twitter, what would you do if you were starting a company today? He's like, well, I go to Y Combinator because I didn't have it. And he's like, but when I went out of Y Combinator, I would only raise 500 grand and I would get to profitability without taking another dollar.
Yes.
And he's like, then I would keep growing and I would maybe raise money, but probably not. And he's like, the way that I would orient my company is I would try to have as few employees as possible for the revenue that I had, so that when I described that dynamic to people, they would be shocked by how few employees that I had.
I love that.
Right? And this is Paul Graham at Y Combinator. Like
that's against the narrative.
I think about it. This is how I think about it, right? Like we did a layoff last year when we were super profitable, and the team's like, "Why are we laying these people off? Like we made $8 million last year." It's like, dude, like we can do the same thing with half the team.
Maybe
like,
that's the goal. Maybe that's where we end up.
If you can do the same thing with half the team, then your responsibility is to do the same thing with half the team. Like that's it. That is your job as a founder, as far as I'm concerned. Yet, so a couple things are interesting about this. One, he has had a part in the biggest VC backed, like I would have never imagined that was what he would say. Would you? The founder of Y Combinator? Like, isn't that thing set up to create massive companies raised on a VC?
Yeah.
So but like, that's what that guy thinks about creating a tech startup. Yet I think the same thing. And I have a wildly contrarian view. Yet the guy who creates the incubator that creates the biggest company in the world believes that about starting startups.
It's
making
like me think.
So it's like what I think is being missed by the world is like, if you're Stripe, you should raise a lot of VC. What's impossible for your ego to stop you from doing is when you're not Stripe, taking the money from a tier 2 investor and thinking you're rich.
Yes.
Right.
If the brag is how much you've raised rather than how much you've sold your company for or how much profit you've generated, it's just the wrong brag.
Yeah, but it's beyond. I think it's beyond a brag. I think like the numbers get used against the founder because it's impossible to not have paper wealth feel like real wealth, especially if you're young.
Yeah.
Like, think about this. Like, you're fucking eating ramen noodles and someone shows up and they're like, if you sign this piece of paper, you personally are worth $28 million. Even though not a dollar of it goes in your personal bank account and you're planning on burning it over 18 months.
Yeah, it's still just a piece of paper.
That is a force that is impossible to get your head around.
It's predatory.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's just is what it is, right? So like, yeah, I just think that's a really, in a million years, would I have guessed that Paul Graham would have said that about like the way to start startups? Like, no way. I would have.
I've heard.
No way.
Now that you tell me that story, I'm connecting some dots. I listened to a bunch of these different futurists. What is his name? Diamandis is one of them that I listened to. And he says some similar things. And as I'm sort of piecing this all together in my head, I sometimes wonder, like, do these guys know where we're headed with certain things, and they're trying to push narratives and whatnot. And I see a lot of things that are happening, and we'll end on this note here, but it seems like we are shifting towards cryptocurrency. Maybe we're going to move completely away from inflationary currency. And if we do, that really is what supports this, abundance investment into these businesses, because they basically print money and funnel it into an industry that they want to see growth, because we want to stay ahead of China or whatever. So print, invest. And then it's like carrots on sticks, right? And everyone just works their tail off. And it keeps us ahead. So works great for the nation, not so great for all the people involved. But if we're headed away from that, if the idea is that we're moving towards the opposite, which is a deflationary currency, which is what Bitcoin is, then it would make sense that they would start pushing this narrative, because the entire sort of entrepreneurial business model would have to change. It would have to be about being super efficient, trying to build a $1 billion business with 3 people in a remote, bedroom, and then having some sort of maybe a quick exit where one of these big, entities scoops up the good stuff. And so I think they might be trying to get us to a place where, instead of them looking at it like, hey, we sit up here, we throw a bunch of money down, and then we see what works out and we acquire it. Instead, it's like, let's create a bunch of tools and enable these people to be able to start companies with very little resources. And then we don't have to keep printing and burning the money. They're going to just go do it. And then we can still acquire the good ones. And we won't need to acquire them for $20 billion, because they wouldn't have raised all that money and bloated the valuation. That was a lot right there. I don't know if that made sense, but that kind of all just came into my head at the last minute there.
There's just infinite political pressure to print money indefinitely.
Yeah.
This Doge thing, my God, if they can figure out how to cut get the budget close to balance, that would just be the greatest thing ever. In a world where that's not happening, has incredible potential. It's just like, man, how long is it going to take?
Well,
you know what I mean? Or is there this like parallel economy of things that are not that, and in the real world, it's still, it's guns and oil and cars and shit like that, and like there's this other virtual world where it's like as big of an economy, but it's like not that, I don't know.
Well, I hope this isn't too dystopian of a way to end it, but I don't think that we'll be able to sort of gradually get to the vision that I just portrayed. I think the only way to get there is literally a catastrophe, a black swan, crash the dollar, it never comes back. Like, I think that's the only way it happens. It's not going to be some sort of gradual, but it seems like we're skating in between those two worlds right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what direction we go in. Yeah. Well, you're positioned in the way, like the right way to be, right? Because you can survive in either of those worlds. So
rock and roll. Thanks for having me, Collin.
Likewise. Good stuff,
man.
Adam. Bye-bye.